stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is here. And you must treat here as a powerful stranger. You must ask permission to know it and to be known. The forest, it breathes, so listen. It answers, I have made a place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again and say, here. No two trees are the same to raven, and no two branches are the same to wren. If a tree or a bush does look different, then you know you are here, and surely you are not lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are, and you must let it find you. Good morning and welcome to Fountain Street Church. I'm the Reverend Christopher Rowe. I have the pleasure of serving as the acting senior minister here, and I use he, him pronouns. And on behalf of everyone who calls this their spiritual home, welcome to worship this morning. No matter who you are, no matter where you are right now or where you live, whether it's right at Fountain Street or across town or across the nation, regardless of whether you come with joy or hope or more questions than answers or grief, all who wish to be a part of a more just and equitable world, all of you and each of us have a place here and are one with us in this community where love and justice and inclusion are the shared work of our liberating faith. The poem that welcomed us into our time of worship together this morning is by David Wagner, and some of you might remember it if you were worshiping with us at the beginning of the Lenten season this past winter. It's called Lost, and we heard it read aloud in February, and we also saw an illustration by our very own Marilee Holiday as we began our intentional journey of getting lost. And as we surrendered ourselves to floundering, and as we took one another's imaginative and virtual hands and said yes to going into the wilderness together. We did indeed go into the wilderness with one another, and it occurs to me this morning that we didn't often stop and reflect upon the wilderness itself. What did it look like? What did it feel like? What does the wilderness smell like or sound like? Where is it? What is it? Admittedly, going into the wilderness and allowing myself to get intentionally lost always conjures up these feelings of dark, brambly forests and overgrowth and thorns and decay and of fear and, of course, uncertainty. But how many of us actually feel this way about the wilderness and about forests and, of course, about trees? It almost seems ironic that something as inspiring and as life-giving as a tree or a forest or the wilderness is often used and also used to evoke seasons of uncertainty and loss. I've been thinking a lot about trees this week, maybe because it's spring and it's getting a little warmer and they're finally blooming, or maybe it's just because I've been looking for it and so signs of them bubble up around me, but it seems like everywhere I turn, the themes of trees are there in front of me. Recently, I finished a wonderful book called The Hidden Life of Trees, and no sooner had I finished it than I discovered this moving and illustrated story, The Tree and Me, at my favorite bookstore. And you'll hear that story in a little bit, but I won't spoil it for Reverend Greta Joe, who's going to share it with us. I also recently finished a tree planting project with my neighbors and discovered an amazing organization called the Tree Sisters. And then, much to my surprise and to my glee, our very own Conor on staff invited us to think about trees this week in our weekly staff meeting. But that's a story I'm going to save for Greta Joe as well. Yes, trees are everywhere, and of course that's not in itself a profound observation, but how often do we pause and consider what it is that trees might be trying to teach us about ourselves and our community? Well, After the year we've had, and after everything that's been going on, not just globally or at Fountain Street Church, but even in our homes and our inner lives, I thought that this morning it might be a nice opportunity to rest with one another and to reflect and to reimagine ourselves in the ways in which the trees call us to see ourselves. They are, after all, always calling, both literally and figuratively, but are we always still enough to listen? And so as we prepare our hearts and our bodies this Sunday morning to listen to the trees, I invite you to still your mind and to steady your body and hear this prayer of the trees from Claire Dubois. Where trees breathe, new life is born. Where each branch reaches out to me, I know myself held in their arms of purest generosity. Where the leaves fall, I am blessed with a giving back that nourishes the roots of my own soul. For the trees reflect who and how I can be, standing tall, standing true, standing honest, and undeniably me. Unafraid to love, to give, to share, and to bend. So I bless the forest as I learn from them. Welcome again to Fountain Street Church and to this time in which we might just learn to bless the forest and the trees as we take a moment to listen to them and learn from them. Welcome to worship, welcome to home, and welcome to Fountain Street Church.
For this church year, we have lit these candles as a sign of our connection while we could not gather within these four walls. So I light them again today as an invitation to reach out across the distance to each other. I light the candle for healing peace. A candle for love and compassion. Candle for community. And a candle for justice. With the hope and the prayer that each of these would be known in the hearts and experienced in the lives of those within this community and beyond its walls. trees are calling us to listen. And this lesson comes from a book, The Tree in Me by Karina Lukin. The tree in me is part apple, part orange, pear, almond, plum, part yum, part shade, and part sun. The tree in me is seed and blossom, bark and stump, branch and trunk, and crown. It is bird, squirrel, worm. And bee. And because there is a tree in me, there is wind. And rain and dirt. And a river with fish. And a sky, too. The tree in me is strong. It bends and has roots that go deep. Down to where other roots reach up toward their own trunk, branch, crown. And sky, too. Because there is a tree and a sky and a sun in me, I can see. That there is also a tree in you. So what is the tree in you? I want to take a moment today to explore that question with you. If you are joining us live and have access to the YouTube chat, go ahead and find your way to your keyboard. What is the tree in you? This week, Conor invited us in our weekly staff meeting during check-in time to explore that question. If you could be a tree, what would you be? Now, I'm going to invite you to get as specific as you can. Don't just say a big tree or a nice tree. Maybe don't even just pick a species. How specific can you get? Let me share Conor's answer. The island of Tasmania, off the south tip of Australia, is home to some of the most well-managed forests in the world. Timber is harvested sustainably in a way that encourages new growth and avoids disturbing ecosystems. As other types of timber around the world have become scarce, Tasmanian blackwoods have become prized by a new generation of guitar makers for its acoustic properties and its beautiful grain. So if Conor could be a tree, he'd be a Tasmanian blackwood, patiently waiting to become part of dozens of guitars. If I could be a tree, I would be a gnarly old apple tree hidden in a back 40, full of beautiful white blossoms in the spring that feed the nearby bees and bring sweet scents to the forest. And then come fall, I would be filled with apples that filled the bellies of passing animals and maybe some passing humans too, bringing beauty and nourishment to the forest. What kind of tree would you be? Where would that tree be? If you listen closely to the lessons that tree has to teach you, what is it saying? If you've found the tree in you, now listen to the tree in me, to the tree in others in your life. What is it saying? How is it calling you to listen?
The trees are calling us to presence. They are calling us to be present. In his engaging book, The Hidden Life of Trees, German forester and nature advocate Peter Wolleben observes that trees are present with virtually everything that they face, and in their presence they pay attention. They are aware. Believe it or not, trees actually have a heightened awareness that changes in the seasons. It doesn't just happen to them like we might think or the way it seems every year. They quite literally pay close attention and use their own version of their nerve cells to anticipate shifts in temperature, dramatic changes in wind, and new patterns of daylight. Without this intentional posture of paying such close attention, they'd be at risk for dropping their leaves too soon and being unable to take advantage of precious sunlight that can be harnessed into energy. Or they could hold on to their leaves too long, dramatically increasing their risk of being blown over by fall and winter storms. Or they could suffer unsustainable cracks due to the weight of condensation and ice on their branches in the fall. So, trees don't resist changes in the weather or pretend that change does not exist, nor do they attempt to blindly power through change. Trees embrace seasons of change. They are acutely aware of change. They accept change, and they adapt themselves by controlling what they can control. By controlling what they control. And all of this starts with paying attention. The trees should inspire all of us to pay close attention. And this morning we celebrate that the trees are calling us to presence. I wonder, how have we as individuals and as a church community been called to presence over this past year together? And how are you being called to presence this morning?
Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, oh, we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I traveled, and the earth is my blue boat home.
The trees are calling us to patience. They're calling us to be patient. Trees share an unspoken and yet universal rule. Pace yourselves. Pace yourselves. Regardless of the make and model or type and build of trees, they must pace themselves so that they don't grow too tall or too wide for their trunk structures, or too vast for their roots, or too spindly in ways that invite disease and injury. More simply put, if a tree grows too fast or too often, they'll die. And this is not an easy task for trees. It's not easy for any of us to be patient. It's a challenge, especially if resources are plentiful, like spring rains and sunlight. While exploring beech trees in Germany, Peter Wohlleben observed that though we might assume that young trees in old-growth forests are actually challenged by this location, it's actually better for them to be under the cover of 200-year-old trees. They become healthier, and they adopt a posture of slow growth. He goes on to observe that 200-year-old mother beech trees, for example, shade the young ones and create a canopy overhead that allows very little light to penetrate, thus slowing their growth and pacing their reach. Scientists have actually learned that slow growth in young beech trees helps them live longer and become stronger. As young beech trees grow more slowly, they remain flexible, resistant to storms, and resilient to wind, and become tougher in the final fights against damaging fungi and disease when they come into a forest. By the time a young beech tree is 80 years old, they're entering their own adolescence stronger than ever. In their patience and in their pacing, trees remind us that it is essential to attend to our inner core and to our health before extending beyond ourselves. The trees should inspire us to invest in our inner life and to allow for the posture of patience to nourish us. And this morning, we celebrate that trees are calling us to patience. I wonder, how have we as individuals and as a church community been called to patience over this past year together? And how are you being called to patience this morning?
The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't yet know. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or feast together. Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is your invitation to help us feast together, to give from your abundance into the abundance of this whole, of this community. We may not yet know exactly how communities of trees act as a collective, but we do know that a large part of how this community functions as a collective requires financial support, your financial support. So I ask you to give abundantly to help us feast together. The offering will now be gratefully received.
The trees are calling us to community. They are calling us to be community. You know, you can actually measure the health and well-being of a tree, and it's no surprise that the healthiest of trees are not growing in Target parking lots by themselves or even in clusters of trees in subdivisions or our downtown streets. The healthiest and longest living trees live in forests and are surrounded by their family and their friends. In the same study of trees that I referenced earlier, it was observed that a grouping or community of beech trees actually synchronized their rate of photosynthesis together, despite when they might have different spots of different types of soil or water levels or nutrients. And it allows them to equalize their resources so that all trees in their community can flourish. They distribute their water and their nutrients throughout their community, and it helps the weaker trees stay strong and have a chance. Throughout the hidden life of trees, Peter Wohlleben observes countless examples of how trees quite literally can sense when other trees around them are ill or broken or are damaged, and the ways in which they quite literally care for one another as well. Hear this passage from his book. A single tree is not a forest. On its own, a tree cannot establish a consistent local climate. It is at the mercy of the wind and the weather. But together, many trees create an ecosystem that moderates the extremes of heat and cold, stores its own vast resources of water, and generates a great deal of humidity. And in this environment, trees can live to be very, very old, but to get to that point and to arrive at this place, the community must remain intact no matter what. The community must remain intact no matter what. Trees remind us that we need one another, that we depend on one another, and that we need to support one another, which sounds pretty familiar, right? The trees should inspire us to truly open ourselves to the possibilities of our interconnectedness, and this morning we celebrate that the trees are calling us to community. I wonder, how have we as individuals and as a congregation been called into community over this past year? And how are you being called into community this morning? This hour of worship with one another is not our last connecting point on Sunday mornings. Immediately following our time together, you are invited and encouraged to go to The Deepening, which is a time for us to connect over Zoom and go deeper with one another in today's themes. You can access The Deepening by going to the Zoom link that was in your email that went out this morning, or you can reach out to our social media platforms and somebody will be happy and eager to share the link with you. All are welcome in The Deepening, and it's just a wonderful time to connect and go deeper together. We know that the trees are calling us to be present and to pay attention and augment ourselves a little bit to the changing of seasons. And we have a literal season coming up that we celebrate called summer here at Fountain Street Church. And with that comes several augmentations that we're very excited about. The first of which is that the Summer Speaker Series is coming right up in 2 weeks, beginning Memorial Day weekend. Gary Eberly will be our first speaker, and you can actually find out about Gary and all the rest of the speakers, their biographies, their pictures, and even the schedule by going to fountainstreet.org/summer speakers. Additionally, we will see the absence of the deepening and the grounding this summer as we take a moment to rest as well as prepare for the fall. In the fall, we're making plans for what in-person and hybrid and inclusive worship will look like for Fountain Street Church. And so with that, we need a moment to pause and enjoy the summer together. And so you'll notice that we won't have the deepening and grounding every week, but there will be other offerings coming your way, including the ability to connect in person over the summer. A special publication is going out this week, so watch your email inboxes for more information about those things, as well as so much more. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't invite anybody with able and willing bodies to come down to the church on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Right outside of the church, we're tending to our own trees, and we are pulling up roots of trees past and getting ready to plant roots of new trees that will bless this community. And so if you're able, if you've got a little time to spare, please join me in our garden club as well as other volunteers to get a little bit dirty and get a little bit sweaty and get some of those roots cleared out so our new native species garden can grow and flourish. All of these things can be found in your Friday Flash, the Wednesday Weekly, as well as online. So please take a moment to really check in and see what's coming your way here at Fountain Street Church.
The lessons of the forest, of the wilderness, of nature that surrounds us are numerous. We have heard a few today, being called to listen, to presence, to patience, to community. Wherever you are and wherever you are going in the coming week, I hope that these lessons go with you, that they guide you on your journey, that they might make that journey a little less lonely. I offer us once again wisdom from Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. We Americans are reluctant to learn another language of our own species, let alone another species. But imagine the possibilities. Imagine the access we would have to different perspectives, to things we might see through other eyes, the wisdom that surrounds us. We don't have to figure out everything by ourselves. There are intelligences other than our own, teachers all around us. Imagine how much less lonely the world might be. So as you go into this week, beloveds, as you leave our community of care and go out into the world, know that you do not go alone, that the lessons of the trees and that the presence of this community go with you. Blessed be.